Gallup has released a shock poll showing that 2 in 3 Americans is sick and tired of President Trump playing games with his support for Ukraine. Just how did the president manage to somehow unite American public sentiment in one of the most decisive and divisive issues in the country? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Plus, we are going to cover the Russian central bank playing fast and loose with interest rates, and of course, Ukraine's efforts to get more Patriot missile batteries. Okay, so this is the crazy poll. The reason is because this was a broad poll conducted by Gallup, right, an independent polling agency in the United States, showing that President Trump's overall approval rating is actually pretty abysmal at 37%. And with this approval rating is, again, usually this is the percent that approve. As you can see, Republicans basically unchanged in their absolutely unified support for President Trump. And of course, U.S. adults, those that are independent and aren't hyperpartisan, have steadily declined, him losing almost a quarter of his total support among all U.S. adults, going from nearly 57% to just 37%, or excuse me. That's about 20 to 25% of his support has eroded among the public. Of course, Democrats who, again, 6% said, listen, they were like me. I was out here. I said, listen, I'll root for any president that does good governance, good policies, adheres to the Constitution, right? And then they see the person they actually got, and they realize that basically any person who identifies as basically hating Trump is the defining trait of the Democratic Party, which is, well, he gives us plenty of evidence, as we can see here, that when you look at the individual issues, you can see that actually his handling of Ukraine is one of his least popular. Literally, the only issue in which he polls worse right now is the federal budget, something that he has literally destroyed. He manages to cut popular programs and increase the budget deficit, something that literally would be like impossible, right? Imagine if you went into your budget and you cut out your rent payment and still somehow manage to increase your total amount of credit card debt, right? Your parents would be like, how did you do this? This shouldn't even be possible. So the fact that he is within 4 points of an almost comically bad governance is a sign that really his handling of Ukraine has exposed him as kind of, I don't hate to say it, as close to him as the buffoon that those of us that follow the war have been saying that he is, right? We talked about the fact that his envoy, Steve Witkoff, is almost comically ill-prepared to negotiate with Putin. But the fact that even, again, Steve Witkoff went to meet Putin, couldn't even name the regions that were being fought over. That's something that you should probably pin down before you go to high-level negotiations. And the fact that the president, who's ultimately responsible for all of his key appointments, thought this guy was competent, didn't even think to ask a couple of salient questions before appointing him, is a sign that, again, this is someone who's not serious. And we can see why. Bear in mind, this polling data was collected before Trump's kind of U-turn on Ukraine. It was collected between July 7th and 21st. So before Trump finally said, hey, I think Vladimir Putin's playing us. And here's the problem, is that basically, whether you were supportive of Ukraine's, some Americans say, listen, I just don't think we should fight proxy wars. I don't think we should support our allies in fighting off aggression. I think that should be someone else's job. Well, if you believe that, then you're still someone who says, okay, Vladimir Putin wants to take Ukraine, let him have it. So, and if you say, no, we should support our allies in fighting aggression and push back against autocracies, particularly those like Putin's Russia, who has a matter of state policy, advocate for the destruction of the United States. They say, well, maybe we should just support our allies. We should just help them. The fact is, Trump managed to do neither of those things. He still remained deeply involved. He labored under the absolute idiotic delusion that Vladimir Putin was just a peaceful guy who just wanted peace. Those 4 other times he invaded his neighbors, those were just oopsie daisies. This isn't, Trump just has to ask him politely to get to peace. And literally 2 in 3 Americans are saying that's idiotic. This is clearly not the case. You can see even among Republicans, it is the worst issue for him. More Republicans support his absolutely unhinged budget slash and burn, somehow both slashing and burning the budget and increasing the debt. Literally, the situation in Ukraine is the worst polling area for Republicans. Because again, are we fighting an autocracy, or are we ending being the world police, right? Trump managing to piss off people who believe neither of those things. And insanely enough, his actually has approval. It's his highest approval rating in the Democratic Party, which again, it shows that he manages to somehow just like collect these insanely, he doesn't have a policy on Ukraine. And so if you want to see the policy you believe in, you're going to see it. Right. So again, this is probably the group of Democrats who say war is bad and we shouldn't support war anywhere, not realizing that, well, if your goal is to create more war, what you'll do is make invading your neighbor an incredibly rewarding experience. Right. And so this complete insanity is, again, let's take a look at the historic data. Let's put this in some context. Right. So August 2022, 6 months into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, nearly 40% of Americans said we're not doing enough to help these guys, right? And 24% said we're doing too much. And you can see here, June of 2023, this was the height of the Ukrainian counteroffensive preparations. You might remember the counteroffensive really reached its apex here in October with 41% of Americans said, hey, I think you're doing too much to help Ukraine. About a third said we're doing just the right amount. Remember, this is not a fixed target because the U.S. has done different things to aid Ukraine throughout this time. So when we literally trained, equipped, bankrolled 12 Ukrainian brigades, and they basically got buzzsawed by the Russians, 41% of Americans were like, I think we're doing too much, right? Whereas 33% were like, yes, training dozens of brigades, equipping them to fight the Russians. This is absolutely right. And 25% were like, no, we need to do more. We need to clearly enable them to win. So again, the height of U.S. support still had a combined majority of Americans saying this is either just right or not enough. And you can see that the number of people that say not enough, once the Ukraine aid, remember that Ukraine aid package, the one that was being debated during the electoral cycle and the Republicans effectively killed and delayed for months and months. Yeah, that's had 1 in 3 Americans saying we're not doing enough. And an all-time low, 26% were like, no one thinks we're doing the right amount. So you could see here the reversal. This is the shock reversal here, is that 46% of Americans are like, we're not doing enough. And again, the biggest change is that we stopped doing anything. So 30% of Americans were like, well, we're still sort of helping them, right? Remember, this is pre-Trump's election. And 30% of Americans are like, well, we're not doing enough. We could do more. It would be nice to do more. And then Trump takes over and truly pulls the rug out on the Ukrainians. And suddenly 46% of Americans saying, yeah, no kidding, we're not doing enough, right? We're not even sharing intelligence with them. We're pulling the rug out from funds that we've allocated, that constitutionally the president has to allocate to Ukraine. So yeah, I'm surprised it only increased by 50%, right? From 30 to 46. You can see an all-time low, basically, or a 2-year low of Americans who say we're doing too much. No kidding. And of course, literally no one thinks we're doing the right amount because, well, we're doing nothing. So this is a huge losing issue for the president, which should shock no one. Because again, this is one of the areas in which the president himself has kind of been forced to admit he got played. Right? Zelensky sat him down in the Vatican and was like, Trump, Vladimir Putin is playing you. He's stringing you along. He says he wants peace, but then he does things like drop a cluster bomb on Easter Sunday services in a major downtown area. No military gain to be had. It exists solely to inflict damage, right? Ukraine says, listen, we sent our president, Zelensky, to Istanbul to engage in peace negotiations. And Putin sent his deputy secretary of interior, basically, who went there, who didn't have the authority to negotiate anything, and proceeded to mock and insult the Ukrainian delegation. So and while that was happening, Russia was actively bombing Ukrainian cities. The fact that Trump took so long to realize something that Zelensky told him to his face, that the American public eminently realized, probably realized on day one, and that the entire national security apparatus of the United States also realized, the fact that the president was the last one across the finish line to figure this out should be a bigger scandal than many of his other cover-ups, which are also kind of egregious. But the fact is that this should be the nail in the coffin for the Trump is playing 5D chess crowd, who again, his 5D chess resulted in Vladimir Putin doing literally nothing, taking no action, making no compromises, and Trump literally spinning himself in circles and ending up further behind than he started. So before we talk about the Russian central bank, who somehow, despite everything, things are still not going great for the Russians. But if you are interested in supporting the channel, supporting me, you should definitely become a member of Combat Vet News. This is my version of Patreon. It has literally hundreds of uncensored combat videos dating back to the start of the war. So if you want to see how the war has transformed and get access to twice a week video drops that don't appear here because, well, frankly, YouTube would ban my channel in a second if some of these combat videos went live here. So if you want to support me, keep me and the team doing this every single day, 7 days a week, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. Okay. So things are not great for Russia, to be clear, despite Vladimir Putin's actually kind of savvy playing. It's not even that savvy. It's just literally his policy was tell Trump what he wants to hear and then do whatever the hell he wants. Right. But I guess it was savvy in the sense that, well, nobody else has figured this out. But that doesn't mean things are great in Russia. As you can see, Ukraine launching a slew of deep strike attacks into Russian territory, including many of their chemical plants, many of their oil and gas infrastructure plants. There's reportedly actually Russian oil revenues are hitting massive losses. According to Reuters, for example, in July of this year, Russian oil revenue is probably going to drop by about 37%. This is basically the Russian oil industry, in part, being gutted by the war effort, but also cheaper oil and a stronger ruble. But again, these I think are sort of mutually playing out. Right? The more people want to buy Russian oil, the more rubles they need to do it. Therefore, the value of the ruble is going to start to the ruble will increase. But I think you're seeing this stronger ruble represented by the fact that there's fewer rubles in circulation, if that makes sense. So ultimately, what you have is a difficult situation in which the Russian oil revenues, remember, these are the things, this is the lifeblood of the Russian state. Okay. These oil revenues, losing nearly 40% of your oil revenue year over year is a disaster for Russia, for the Russian economy. And what we're seeing also is that the Russian central bank is already starting to slash its interest rates. But this is a problem. You might recall that the president has been pressuring our Fed chair to slash interest rates because he says, look, inflation is coming down. But the Fed chair says, listen, I am an independent policymaker. I'm not subject to political pressure. And the reason he's not cutting rates is because you keep rates elevated above inflation to fight it. If your rate is below inflation, then you're going to be chasing inflation. You're never going to actually get ahead of it. So you don't start to cut until inflation has been tamped down. In the case of the Fed, they're saying, listen, we got to tamp down inflation all the way. You got to make sure the fire's out before you walk away. And the Russian central bank knows this. The Russian central bank knows this is how you have to fight inflation. The problem is that unlike the Fed, which is fully independent, the Russian central bank is not, right? Vladimir Putin will push anyone out of a window who he doesn't like. And he has actually opened an investigation into the Russian Fed chair, the Russian central bank chair, Elvira Nabiulina. And he's opened that as a way to signal to her that you have to play these games with me. I can coerce you to make policy decisions that I want. And so she has said, of course, one, you might note that we talked 2 months ago that the Russian central bank bizarrely stopped curbing inflation rates or curbing interest rates prematurely, even though they had not yet caught the runaway Russian inflation. But now they're cutting rates by a lot, dropping from 20% down to 18%, right? And the strange part is that the Russian central bank says inflationary pressures had eased in recent months. They say that, yeah, inflation is falling, but these are comically low inflation rates. They're just simply not true. They say, oh, it fell to 4.8%. Again, I just struggle to even believe that. The Russian central bank said inflation expectations remain elevated, that further easing would be cautious and gradual. This literally doesn't make any sense. The central bank cannot say inflation expectations are high, but we're cutting rates. If it's working, you keep doing it. Okay. This is like, it's like you have an infection, you take an antibiotic and the antibiotic starts working. And then you go, well, it's working. Now we can reduce the dose. No, you finish at the full dose because that is how you fight it. Again, it's like fighting a fire and saying, see, putting 3 hoses worth of water on it is working, and saying, great, it's working. We can turn off one of the hoses. That's not how you fight inflation. And again, look no further than the U.S. central bank, the most credible central bank in the entire world, knows that the rates stay high and don't get cut. You don't cut it until you've tamped inflation down to the level that you want it, which in the Fed's case is 2%, not 2.7, not 2.8, not 2.34956, 2. They've said this explicitly. And so the Russians cannot say, oh, well, 5% still pretty good. It'd be a real policy, a really independent central bank would not do this. But the answer is, of course, Vladimir Putin wants to see rates get cut because he's not he's not elected. So he doesn't care about the Russian electorate. The average Russian's ability to buy food is only relevant to him if it were to become so bad that he would risk a revolution. The people he serves, the people who actually keep him in power are the Russian oligarchs. And Russian oligarchs, they have businesses, and those businesses rely on continual loans to sustain operations. This is not a oligarch bad, right? This is intrinsic to how businesses work, right? If I sell iPhones, I need to pay my employees at my Apple store today for the iPhones they'll sell tomorrow. So intrinsically, you have to have someone who's willing to loan you money till you sell the iPhones, the washing machines, whatever it is. And so this is just how businesses operate, right? So they are really sensitive to interest rates. And when they're at 20%, these businesses are getting cooked. And these oligarchs have gone to Putin and are like, listen, we are behind you in this war 100%. But if I don't have a business left, if my business goes bankrupt, there's nothing for us to do. Like I can't, I won't be here to support you. I'll be another broke, drunk Russian. So that's why Putin is pressuring the central bank to cut interest rates, even though it's going to likely cause continual Russian inflation. Now, let's see if I can find it here. Even some of the independent analysts here quoted by the Wall Street Journal have said that there's something off about all of this. And let's see if I can find it here. I think they described it as hawkish. Okay, well, maybe it was a different article, but the idea is that one independent analyst was like, the words of the central bank do not align with the actions. The words the central bank uses are inflation expectations remain elevated, hawkish. The actions are dovish, saying inflation's been beaten, let's wind it down. Again, there's a reason. When this was announced, the Russian stock exchange fell a little bit, 0.22%. But ultimately, I think that shows that the average Russian business owner, the aggregated Russian economy is not going to benefit from this huge policy shift. I mean, imagine what this stock market would do in the US if the Fed were to announce that rates are going to rise. It would be cut by 2%. The stock market would rise because money was going to become cheaper. Businesses would love it. The average American would probably see a big inflation pop. But that is not a problem for the average. That is not a problem for Vladimir Putin. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Thanks to our Colonel tier members, people like Peter Fucci, Dan M, Petchaturo, Henry Russier, Idis Guy called Chris Rossi, L90, Sergey Zinchenko, D Stewart, James Porsche, B Emmerling, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. Hope you enjoyed yesterday's videos, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.